flour, fines, and falsetto. You wake up in the narrowest bed imaginable. The mattress feels like it's stuffed with wheat chaff, and the pillow is, well, it's definitely not a pillow. Possibly a folded apron. Possibly a leftover bread loaf. The air smells warm and yeasty, like someone's been baking since midnight, which, to be fair, they probably have. You hear clattering downstairs, laughter, and, yes, singing. High-pitched, slightly off-key, but undeniably cheerful. You stretch carefully. The beams above your head look like they're made of equal parts oak and complaint. You sit up and remember where you are. Paris, the 13th century, and you're staying above a bakery. Not a quaint, romantic boulangerie, a gilded, licensed, rule-bound, bread or you're dead sort of bakery. Outside the window, the city's just beginning to wake up. The bells of Notre Dame toll the morning hour. Horses clop, markets stir, and somewhere from a rival street, someone yells, "Your crust is burnt," followed by something deeply unprintable about sourdough. This is a city of rules, guilds, ordinances, laws written in actual parchment and in passive-aggressive glances from fellow tradesmen. And among those strange old rules is one particular line, buried somewhere in a dusty municipal scroll. No baker shall sing whilst kneading or baking, lest they be fined or flogged. Yes, bakers in medieval Paris were banned from singing. Not because their voices were bad, although that probably didn't help. Not even because they were distracting, though flower dancing is admittedly a safety hazard. But because, well, that's what we're here to explore. Breathe in, slowly. Let the scent of crusty loaves and over-fermented dough lull you. And before we dig deeper into the world of musical misconduct and medieval gluten guidelines, remember to like, subscribe, and gently comment where you're listening from. Bonus points if you've ever been silenced mid-baguette. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. The Guild of Bakers and their war on whistling. The bakery is bustling now. You're downstairs holding a wooden cup of something that might be barley coffee or might be regret. The bakers are moving fast, aprons dusted with flour, forearms strong from years of dough thumping, and faces already lined with the kind of exhaustion that only comes from waking up before roosters and possibly being fined for humming. One of them nudges you with a tray of rolls and mutters, "If you hear me singing, cover your ears and pretend it's the oven." It's not a joke. Not entirely. Because in 13th century Paris, baking wasn't just a profession, it was a protected art. The Guild of Bakers, or Les Boulangers, was one of the city's most powerful and particular trade organizations. They set the standards for weight, ingredients, working hours, and yes, behavior. Baking was serious business. So serious, in fact, that the Guild had rules about sound. See, Guild members believed that too much singing, especially during kneading, could imply distraction, and distraction might lead to burnt bread, underbaked loaves, or, heaven forbid, air pockets. In a city where most people relied on bakers for their daily bread, the Guild could not risk the reputation of its crust. There were other worries, too. Rumors floated, as rumors often do, that some bakers were inserting secret prayers or even curses into their kneading songs, hoping to bless one batch and ruin the dough of a rival. Was it true? Unclear, but the city council took no chances. Thus, the ordinance. No singing, chanting, humming, or other utterance melodic or theatrical during the preparation of breadstuffs. Even whistling was suspect. Too jolly, too risky. You watch a young apprentice begin to murmur a tavern tune under his breath, only to be lightly bunked by a paddle by the head baker. No scolding, just a weary look that says, "Do you want to spend the night in bread jail?" Yes, that was real too. Misbehaving bakers could be fined, flogged, or, if their crimes were particularly glutinous, locked in the bakery cellar with spoiled rye, a fate worse than flatbread. Historians still debate whether this rule was rigorously enforced or more of a performative flex by the guild elders who, quite frankly, just preferred silence before sunrise. You sit by the hearth and munch on a roll. It's dense, a little burnt, and utterly silent, just like the guild prefers. The bakery spy and the case of the baritone baguette. The fire in the oven crackles with purpose. It's still early, though you've lost track of how many rounds of bread have come and gone. The air is thick with steam and secrets. Somewhere behind the stone hearth, you hear the faint scrape of parchment against wood. That's when the door creaks open, not with the usual bang of a flower delivery, but the sly whisper of someone entering on tiptoe. In walks a man wearing a cloak far too dramatic for this amount of yeast. He's carrying a small leather-bound notebook. The bakers freeze. A boy drops a proofing basket. Someone coughs in what is clearly fear disguised as flour inhalation. You whisper to the head baker, "Who's that?" He grumbles, "Inspector, guild appointed." He listens. You blink. Listens for what? He taps his ear. Singing, whistling, anything with rhythm that isn't kneading. Yes, it turns out in medieval Paris, the Guild of Bakers actually hired auditors. Not to taste the bread, not to inspect the ovens, to eavesdrop. These guild-appointed auditors of sound would make surprise visits to bakeries across the city. Their job was to detect any illicit musical behavior, be it humming a holy hymn or belting out a bawdy tavern tune about saucy tarts and floured bottoms. The man in the cloak walks slowly, listening. He pauses beside a kneading table, where a baker is softly mouthing something. "Are you, praying?" asks the inspector suspiciously. "Just counting," the baker lies. The inspector nods, but he scribbles something in the notebook anyway. You're informed that even the slightest melody could be interpreted as a lapse in focus. And in this highly competitive industry, a lapse meant lawsuits, or worse, public shaming by baguette, a punishment where a loaf was nailed above a baker's door as a warning. One infamous case involved a particularly talented tenor in the Marais district who couldn't help serenading his brioche at dawn. He claimed the crust rose better when sung to. The guild disagreed. He was fined twice. His nickname? Baritone Baguette. The legend says he left Paris for Lyon, where the guild rules were looser and the bread more forgiving. Historians are still unclear whether the brioche actually responded to serenades, but his pastries were said to be unusually fluffy. And so the guild pressed on, auditors with ears like hawks, rules etched in parchment and reinforced with paddle taps. You glance back at the inspector. He's sniffing a sourdough with suspicion. This city didn't just regulate taste. It regulated tone. And in the kitchens of Paris, silence was golden, and occasionally enforced with a ladle. Why the crumb was sacred and the crescendo was not. You're back upstairs now, seated at a tiny wooden table overlooking a street barely wider than a horse's opinion. Below, morning life in Paris continues its gentle jangle. Vendors shouting about carrots, children chasing rats they named, and a priest yelling at a goose. All perfectly normal. You take a sip of thin barley tea and stare down at the crust of a still warm loaf. It's beautiful. Golden, split perfectly along the top, like the bread itself sighed once during baking and left behind a wrinkle of wisdom. You ask the baker, whose name is something like Gerard but with more silent letters, why singing was banned, when surely a cheerful kitchen is a productive kitchen. He looks at you as if you've asked why flour doesn't come from cows. Because the crumb must be respected. Oh. You nod, trying to look wise. Internally, you have questions. Gerard continues, wiping his hands on an apron older than some monarchs. You cannot build a perfect crumb while thinking about love songs or fish markets or a woman named Mireille who didn't write back. Fair point. In medieval Paris, bread was not just food. It was structure, society, a divine right, baked and sold at regulated prices. Any disruption, emotional, melodic, or romantic, was considered a risk to public health. The crumb, in baker terms, refers to the bread's interior, texture, airiness, integrity. And in this century, an uneven crumb was basically culinary treason. Some believed sound vibrations interfered with yeast. Others claimed that singing led to irregular kneading rhythm. One especially dramatic parchment argued that joyful noise tempted the dough to dance, and dancing bread is the devil's brioche. Historians are skeptical, of course, but Guild minutes from 1247 list a full page of complaints filed against melodic misconduct, including one baker who whistled a popular harvest tune and accidentally created 43 loaves with suspicious spirals. That baker, allegedly, was forced to eat them all. The city took no chances. Silence became a sacred part of the baking ritual, alongside rising, proofing, and arguing about who forgot to clean the peel. You tear off a piece of your loaf. The crumb is indeed divine, as soft as a saint's sigh. You chew thoughtfully. Outside, someone starts to hum, and then stops. The silence returns, not enforced by threat, but by quiet reverence. The day the bakers marched, softly and without song. The year is 1286, and while Paris looks roughly the same, leaning houses, uneven cobblestones, and an ongoing feud between a fishmonger and an eel, the baking world is on the verge of something rare, a protest. But not just any protest, a silent one. You're standing now near the Rue des Boulangers, where over 100 bakers, aprons stiff with pride and flour, expressions carved from sourdough discipline, have gathered to make a statement. Their grievance? The latest guild ordinance, an official ban not only on singing, but also on humming, foot-tapping, flour drumming, and, this is real, rhythmic sighing during hours of bread preparation. It was too much. The bakers, already mute for decades, had finally lost their last form of expression, passive-aggressive sighing. The guild had gone too far. So today, they march. No chanting, no drums, just the soft squelch of doughy shoes and the quiet rustle of baking cloths. They carry signs written on old parchment scraps. Silence is golden, but we miss golden tones. Let us hum, you crumb bums. Bread without joy is just a brick. One baker, daringly avant-garde, has painted music notes on her apron. Another clutches a rolling pin like it's a musical baton that forgot its purpose. They move through the streets like a silent loaf rising, slow, unstoppable, faintly puffy. You trail behind, caught between amusement and genuine admiration. They are respectful, orderly, but also defiant. They pass the Hôtel de Ville, a few city scribes peer out nervously, as if someone might break into a baritone verse of the Ballad of St. Yeast. But no one does. The silence holds. Later, this moment will be forgotten by most. There will be no stained glass window in the cathedral for the march of the muffling bakers. No song, obviously, but in some bakery corners they'll whisper the story. We marched for our size. We marched for our crumb. Historians will find little record, perhaps a single dusty complaint scribbled in the margins of a guild ledger. Order preserved, silence maintained, but spirits slightly leavened. And as the crowd dissolves back into the alleys, you hear something soft and brave from a young baker slipping home. A single whistle. Short, unapologetic, followed by 30 seconds of absolute panic, but still a sound. And perhaps, for a moment, the bread rises just a little lighter. Crumbs, clergy, and the choir that wasn't. Today you find yourself inside a church, not for a sermon exactly, but for a peculiar ritual involving both bread and bureaucracy. The stained glass glows gently overhead, saints and angels peering down with the quiet disapproval of those who've never kneaded in their lives. You're here with Gerard, your host baker, and a dozen others from the guild. They're not praying. They're here for an inspection, not of faith, of loaves. Once a month, the church hosts what is solemnly called La Bénédiction du Pain, the blessing of the bread. Each baker brings an offering, not symbolic, not metaphorical, literal bread, hot from the oven, placed carefully on polished pews like sacred relics. The clergy, in flowing robes that swish like undercooked crepes, inspect each loaf. They sniff, they prod. One even uses a tiny brass hammer to tap the crust, not for music, just firmness. You're told in a whisper that these priests once tried to start a choir of bakers, hoping their voices might please both heaven and yeast. It lasted 3 rehearsals. Apparently, centuries of silencing meant no one remembered how to project. One baker fainted after attempting a high note during Ave Iestus. So now the church blesses bread in silence, which honestly suits everyone better. Still, the line between sacred and snackable is thin here. The church believed bread to be divine. The pain béni, or blessed bread, was handed out to parishioners during Mass, often baked by guild members for important days. But even Holy Crust had rules. If a loaf was oversung, or, as one bishop once wrote, baked with vanity and verse, it could be disqualified from the blessing, and possibly taxed. You think back to a rumor you heard, a rogue tenor in Montmartre who baked chant-infused croissants and claimed they cured melancholy. His shop mysteriously caught fire. No one sang about it. So, here in this echoing chapel, the silence hangs thick. You watch a priest lift a round country loaf, nod solemnly, and mark it acceptable. Gerard nudges you. That one hummed last night. You blink. But he passed? Very softly. He smirks. Even silence, it seems, has decibels. You file this moment away as quietly as you can. Another crumb in the long, strange roll of Parisian baking history. The flour tax and the loot that vanished. You've wandered away from the church, following the smell of something toasty. Your feet lead you to a narrow square, tucked between leaning buildings, where a dusty board reads Place du Levant, Sourdough Square. At least 3 cats are asleep on barrels, and one of them is almost definitely judging you. This was once the site of a modest uprising. Not about politics, not about bread quality, but about music and taxes. You find a bench beside a pigeon that seems entirely indifferent to your presence.
Across the square, an old woman, face like an honest walnut, sells tiny loaves shaped like birds. Decorative, possibly sentient. She tells you the story of Thibaut Lemans, a baker lutenist. Thibaut baked in this very square in the early 1300s. His loaves were good, his crusts sang, metaphorically, and he had a habit of playing his lute between batches. Softly, always during proofing. Customers loved it. They claimed his melody-scented bread cured heartbreak, hiccups, and the urge to duel. But the guild, not so fond. Because Thibaut was selling bread with entertainment. That meant he owed a performance tax, typically reserved for street musicians, jugglers, and that one goose trainer by the Seine. Thibaut refused to pay. He argued, "I need dough, not ballads. My lute is not taxed, it is tuned with affection." That, as it turns out, was not a recognized legal category. The guild cracked down. His bakery was fined. His lute was confiscated. Worse, he was placed on temporary baking suspension, which in medieval Paris was basically social exile with extra starch. In protest, Thibaut baked a series of silent protest loaves, shaped like musical instruments, completely unseasoned and aggressively crusty. Customers found them confusing but chewy. Eventually, the lute vanished. Rumors say it's still locked in a guild vault beneath Montmartre. Others believe it was baked into a 7-grain boule and accidentally eaten by a bishop with poor teeth. Historians remain baffled. What's clear is that Thibaut never sang again. But occasionally, someone swears they've heard a lute's faint twang in a warm bakery breeze, usually just before the timer dings. You lean back on the bench. The old woman hands you a bird loaf, and the pigeon next to you finally sighs. No singing here, just crumbs of resistance.
The sourdough whisperers and the yeast that listened. This morning begins with a walk. Your shoes, soft, borrowed, and inexplicably bread-shaped, carry you beyond the city wall toward a small cluster of windmills near the River Bière. The air is damp. The grass whispers like it's in on something. You're headed toward a farm. But not just any farm. This one is rumored to house the last of the sourdough whisperers. They are not a guild. They don't take apprentices. No sign marks their door, unless you count the curious rock that resembles a baguette having an existential crisis. A wiry woman with eyebrows like question marks greets you. "You're late," she says. "Am I?" you ask. "It doesn't matter," she shrugs. "The dough's waiting." You follow her into a cottage that smells of aged flour, thyme, and a slightly judgmental goat. Inside are bowls, dozens of them, each with a bubbling, living, breathing starter. She introduces them by name. Albertine, Philippe, Geneviève, and one ominously named the colleague. "They prefer quiet," she says. "This isn't superstition, it's fermentation etiquette. Sourdough starters, the original wild yeast, were considered moody, temperamental, prone to rebellion if exposed to strong emotion or, heaven forbid, singing. The whisperers believed yeast responded to rhythm, breath, even the pitch of a baker's voice. Too high? The dough panics. Too low? It sulks. So, they spoke in murmurs. They exhaled slowly, and they never, ever whistled. You watch as she lifts a spoon of bubbly starter, holds it like a newborn, and whispers something unintelligible but soothing. The dough wiggles approvingly. Back in Paris, they'd fine her for nonsense, but here the bread rises like it remembers something kind. You ask where she learned this. She points vaguely to a river, somewhere between two fogs and a goose. You nod, as one does. She teaches you to fold the dough with reverence, to listen for tiny sounds, gasps, gurgles, the soft applause of satisfied yeast. There's no need for music. The fermentation sings its own slow lullaby. By the time you leave, a loaf is already rising in the hearth. You hear it breathing, soft, steady, like a hymn that never needed words.
The bread bell and the silence before supper. Back in Paris, evening unfurls like a heavy velvet curtain. Shadows stretch long across the rooftops. The air smells of wood smoke, river mud, and somewhere, inevitably, roasting onions. You wander through the twilight, following a peculiar sound. A bell, but not a church bell, not a market chime. This one rings soft, low, and oddly hungry. You follow it to a narrow street, lit by torchlight and candle stubs, where bakers are emerging from their shops, one by one, carrying baskets. No fanfare, no chatter, just the sound of loaves shifting gently against linen. An old man with an armful of rye nods at you. "Bread bell," he explains. "It tolls for those who forgot to bake." You've stumbled upon an ancient Parisian custom, now mostly forgotten, where each evening a designated bell rang across the quarter to signal the official release of leftover bread. Families too poor to purchase in the morning would line up quietly in the dusk, hands outstretched, hoping for a bit of crust, a heel, a bun gone slightly stale. The bakers, sworn by guild honor, could not speak during this ritual. It was a rule perhaps born of dignity or superstition. "Bread given in silence," said one ordinance, "nourishes both body and soul." You watch as a young girl accepts a round loaf from a baker who bows, wordless. She clutches it like a treasure, like it might sing if squeezed. In a corner, an old woman hums under her breath. No one stops her, perhaps because it's after hours, perhaps because her voice is barely louder than a moth. The bell rings again. This time it's slower, final, and with it the bakers retreat back into their shops. You realize the silence here isn't cold. It's wrapped in warmth, in humility, in the quiet joy of giving without flourish. Even the pigeons seem reverent. You close your eyes and hear it, the hush of gratitude, crusty and whole.
The baker's almanac and the weather that wrote recipes. You wake to thunder, not the dramatic, operatic kind, more like a polite grumble from the sky, like the clouds are stretching their knees after sleeping on stone. The bakery is quiet this morning, oddly so. No clanging pans, no shouting over spilled flour, just the occasional creak of old wood and the hush of waiting. You find Gerard at the window staring out as though reading invisible script on the rain. He says, "We don't bake today, because of the mist." You blink and say, "Isn't that just water?" He shakes his head. "Mist makes melancholy dough." And so begins your lesson in the baker's almanac, not the celestial kind used by farmers, but a parchment-bound guide passed down through generations of Parisian bakers, full of superstition, weather notes, and eerily specific personality quirks of yeast. You flip through its wrinkled pages and find entries like, "Avoid sourdoughs on Wednesdays with wind. If it snows before the bell tolls thrice, need only clockwise. Never bake rye when the moon is rude." You ask what that last one means. Gerard simply says, "You'll know it when you feel it." The almanac wasn't just about the elements. It documented the mysterious marriage between atmosphere and appetite, and every serious baker had one. Some pages include tiny drawings of loaf shapes suited for different temperatures. One lists 47 synonyms for crusty in Old French. But most intriguing is a short note from 1312 written in an elegant, wobbly hand. Sang a verse by accident, dough turned vengeful, rose too quickly, collapsed in shame. No signature, just initials, L.D. Gerard believes it belonged to a monk baker known for writing psalms into his pastry crusts. He says the monastery banned him from both parchment and par baking after an incident involving singing yeast and explosive brioche. Historians still debate the truth of that entry. Some say it was metaphorical. Others whisper that the dough learned to breathe. The rain continues, soft as a lullaby, and inside, the ovens rest. No baking today, just listening, watching, waiting for the sky to whisper permission.
The Secret Codes of the Crust Markers Guild. You're in a cellar now. It smells of old stone, forgotten onions, and centuries of ambition. Candles flicker like gossiping ghosts, casting long shadows across racks of cooling bread. Except these loaves aren't cooling. They're archived, labeled, wrapped in linen, resting not on trays, but velvet. This is the hidden archive of the Crust Markers Guild, a fringe group within the Greater Baking Guild of Paris. They weren't known for flavor or fluff. They were known for symbols. Because every loaf that left their ovens bore a mark, a pressed pattern, barely visible, created with a carved stamp or the tip of a skilled finger. To the untrained eye, they looked like mere flourishes, a curl here, a spiral there, a tiny dent like a bread mole. But you've just been told their messages. A spiral meant safe to eat. A zigzag meant day old, haggle hard. A star? Baked by a widowed master. Honor price, do not insult. And a small curled comma contains a secret note baked inside. Yes, that last one sounds like fiction. But Gerard insists it happened once, during the summer of 1354. A young baker fell in love with the apothecary's daughter, but her father disapproved of carbs. So he baked her letters into the loaves, thin slips of parchment folded into air pockets. The crust bore her simple, a poppy flower. She replied by sending tinctures made with anise and cinnamon, spices meant to help the heart rise. They married eventually, opened a bakery near the river. Their signature loaf was shaped like two hands clasped. No one sings about them now. But the archive holds one of their loaves, perfectly preserved, never eaten. The crust still bears the faintest mark, a heart split neatly in two. You reach for it. Gerard stops you. He says, "Some breads are meant to rest." You nod. In the silence, the loaves feel almost alive, like they're waiting for someone to listen, or maybe just remember.
The day the king asked for crust and got a poem instead. You're in a different kitchen now. Not a bakery this time, but the royal kitchens of the Palais du Louvre, long before it thought about becoming a museum. The ceilings are high, the copper pots gleam, and somewhere behind a curtain, a royal stomach is growling. Today's task? Supplying the king with bread. Which should be simple, except today the baker is not present. Instead, the court poet is here, and he's in charge of the crust.
You glance at the nearest servant. Why? They shrug. Something about a flour mishap? The usual baker sneezed on the sponge and was exiled. The poet volunteered. Naturally. You're handed an apron. It's embroidered with rhymes. The poet, named Guillaume, because of course he is standing over a lump of under-kneaded dough and murmuring sonnets at it. He claims this will inspire an emotionally complex crumb. You have doubts. Still, the loaf goes in. What emerges, 47 minutes later, is a misshapen oblong thing with the crust of a shoe and the aroma of self-doubt. Guillaume is thrilled. I shall write its legend. He does, on the crust, with clove oil and a goose feather. When the loaf is delivered to the king, nestled in silk and drama, silence follows. And then, laughter. Not mockery, delight. Turns out, the king, who's bored of everything, has never received a bread poem before. He reads aloud. O crusted crown of golden hue, thy insides soft, thy humor true. Though baked by hand not known for skill, thy warmth does humble kings at will. The court applauds. The poet is knighted. The baker is technically still exiled, but writes to say he's proud. For 3 weeks, the palace issues daily requests for bread with verse. One delivery rhymes. Another tells a riddle. One very avant-garde entry simply says, sorry. The trend fades eventually, like all court fads, but not before one final entry appears in the royal diary. Bread delivered with no song, yet left me full the whole day long. Historians debate whether this refers to an actual loaf or a metaphor for love. But in the kitchens of Paris, for a moment, crusts spoke louder than crumbs.
Of crust trials and the judge who could taste lies. You've been summoned. Not for a crime, though your borrowed baker's hat is askew enough to raise questions, but for observation. Girard insists you witness a peculiar and nearly forgotten civic ritual, a crust trial. Not metaphorical, not poetic, an actual trial for bread. The setting? A low hall beneath the market square. The floor is dusty with flour. A wooden platform has been raised, and on it stands today's defendant, a squat, slightly burnt bowl of barley rye. Its crime? Deceit. You sit beside a clerk whose quill has been gnawed to the point of resignation. He explains in a whisper, the crust tribunal was created to protect the people. A good crust speaks truth, a bad one lies. You nod, slowly. Of course. The judge arrives. He is ancient, bearded. His robes are trimmed with what you hope is decorative wheat. His title, carved into a stone tablet, is Juge de Croûte et Conscience, Judge of Crust and Conscience. He lifts the offending loaf, taps it twice, sniffs. He frowns. He claims this loaf was baked with local water. The room gasps. But it smells of river thyme and foreign salt. Someone faints. What follows is an eerily calm interrogation of the baker, who insists the ingredients are as listed. He offers receipts. He points at a goat. The judge slices the loaf in half. Inside is a pocket of undercooked dough the size of an insult. The room murmurs. The verdict? Guilty of crust fraud. The punishment? The loaf is not discarded, but eaten, slowly, by the baker while reciting the baker's oath of honesty. By crumb and crack, by rise and rest,
I swear to bake with only zest. No false salt shall my dough disguise, no trick shall rise beneath these eyes. Gerard nudges you. We haven't done these trials in years, but once every baker had to face the bench. You ask what the judge gets paid. Mostly bread, he shrugs, but also respect. And sometimes fennel. You leave the tribunal humbled and slightly hungry. Above ground, the market bustles, but below, a single burnt loaf has been judged, and history, briefly, has remembered its name.
The secret monastery oven that only baked at night. This time, you travel by candle. Gerard hands you a stubby taper, whispers something about discretion, and leads you into the winding hills beyond Paris. The road is quiet, fogged with mist, and flanked by old cypress trees that lean like sleepy librarians. Eventually, you reach a crumbling abbey. It smells of ash, time, and memory. You enter through a side door, low and arched. Your candle flickers nervously. Inside, the monks are not chanting, not reading, not even awake. Except one. He wears an apron over his robe, and he's baking in absolute silence. This, Gerard tells you, is the four de minuit, the midnight oven. A centuries-old monastery tradition. Only one loaf may be baked each night. Only by a monk who has taken the vow of crumb, an oath of quiet patience and obsessive hydration control. The oven is carved into the stone wall itself. No clock, no timer, just intuition and touch. Tonight's monk, Brother Isidore, is baking a nocturne loaf, a recipe passed down for so long no one remembers what it's meant to taste like or why it's shaped like a sleeping cat. But it smells divine. You ask why the oven is only used at night. Bread baked in silence, Gerard whispers, is believed to absorb dreams. This was once a sacred belief, that certain loaves, baked under starlight and quiet intention, could carry peaceful visions to those who ate them. The monks never sold these loaves. They gave them to orphans, to the heartbroken, to those who walked the edge of despair. Some said the dreams came true. Others said the loaves were just warm. Historians disagree. A few even claim the original oven was built by a Roman baker who fled the city after a disastrous poetic muffin incident. Others insist the plans were drawn by an architect who baked blueprints into brioche. The only record is a tiny inscription carved above the oven door. Heat without haste, crust without pride, sleep within. Brother Isidore places the loaf on a small wooden altar, lets it cool, and without a word, offers you a piece. It's soft, slightly sweet, and when you close your eyes, you swear, for a moment, you hear a lullaby made entirely of steam.
The Crumb Museum and the Loaf That Never Aged. Morning rises, golden and slow. You find yourself in a quiet courtyard, tucked behind a crumbling alley, shielded from the noise of Paris by ivy and stubborn nostalgia. A wooden sign swings overhead, Musée des Miettes, the Crumb Museum. Yes, you read that right. Inside, the curator, a small man with enormous glasses and the calm air of someone who's never hurried a day in his life, greets you with a whisper. "You've come for the eternal loaf," he says. Of course you have. The museum is a single room, cool, dusty, every surface lined with glass cases. Inside them, crumbs, each labeled with astonishing reverence. Crumb from the First Republic's banquet bread, 1792. Last known crust fragment from Marie of Bourbon's personal brioche. Mysterious corner of toast discovered in a 16th century bishop's hat box. There's even a modern exhibit. Crumb from a forgotten sandwich left on the 1975 Metro Line 3 bench. Preserved by accident, honored by fate. But the centerpiece, the eternal loaf, rests under a thick glass dome at the very center of the room. It is round, it is golden, and somehow, impossibly, it looks fresh. Uncracked, unsliced, untouched by time. The curator tells the story. It was baked in 1421, intended for the wedding of a nobleman and a miller's daughter, but the ceremony was cancelled due to rain, politics, and an unfortunate scandal involving an eel. Rather than discard the loaf, the baker, devastated, sealed it in beeswax and salt, storing it in a cool cellar. Centuries passed. The loaf remained unchanged. When rediscovered in the 1800s, scholars attempted to explain the phenomenon. Theories ranged from sacred yeast to protective humidity to divine sadness. One even suggested the loaf was not bread at all, but an early experiment in edible sculpture. Still, it endures, untasted, unaged, quiet. Visitors often lean close, expecting the smell of decay. But no, it smells, faintly, of cardamom. The curator smiles. We don't touch it, we don't name it, we just let it exist. And there it rests, cradled in shadow and glass, a symbol of bread's quiet legacy, not just as sustenance, but as witness. Witness to laughter, to loss, to love, to exile, to poetry, and, yes, to silence.
Now, dear listener, you've wandered through ovens and cellars, courtrooms and crusts, abbeys and markets. You've heard bells toll for humble loaves and watched dreams rise in secret midnight ovens. You've met bread that listens, crusts that confess, and monks who whisper to yeast like it's a prayer. Let it all settle now. No need to remember every detail, just let the images drift like flour through a sieve. The sound of crackling crust, the hush of a baker's oath, the gentle swirl of steam rising in an old wooden room. Feel the weight of warm linen against your arms. Imagine yourself holding a round, perfect loaf, still warm, still breathing. You sit on a windowsill, feet tucked under, watching fog wrap itself around quiet chimneys. Somewhere a baker is humming, but too softly to break the spell. You are safe here. You are warm. The day is done. And the bread? The bread has done what it came to do. Rest now. Let your breath be slow, like dough rising under a quiet moon. Sleep, dear listener. The oven is off, the crumbs can wait, and you are home.